Nick Bernardo, your host of MyGovWatch Live, the B2G Roundtable. If you're east of the Rocky Mountains here in the U.S., good afternoon. Good morning to those out west, and hello to anyone joining us from the far corners of the earth or watching online in the future. Today's Wednesday, February 21st, 2024. This series is brought to you by MyGovWatch. With a curated white glove approach, MyGovWatch delivers GovCon leads in more than 200 industries using AI best practices at double the rate of free government tools and at a fraction of the cost of legacy websites. Big government contracts do not start with a solicitation, but all roads lead to one, and your budget for hearing about RFPs does not have to be thousands of dollars per year. Start your 14-day free trial today. And folks, today we have at least one returning co-host and her colleague from the firm Koprince McCall Potroff. We have Nicole Pottroff and John Holtz from the firm Koprince McCall Potroff. Welcome, folks. How are you?
Hey, Nick, we're doing great. Thanks for having us. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And John, you're new with us, and it's great to make a new acquaintance. And it's always fun to meet new people out here in the industry. So, folks, Nicole Nicole is an equity partner at the firm where she practices federal government contract law exclusively. Nicole works with clients on a wide variety of transactional matters, from organizational contracts to teaming agreements, and advises clients on compliance with small business and procurement regulations and statutes. Nicole assists clients with litigation matters, including bid protests at the GAO and size and status protests at the SBA. She's also a regular contributor to the government contracting blog at smallgovcon.com. Nicole enjoys helping small businesses solve problems. That's a great bio, Nicole. I wonder, do you memorize it word for word in the elevator, or is there like a shorter version?
There's definitely shorter version, much shorter version. Most of the time when you tell people you're a government contracts attorney, their eyes glaze over anyway, so then we move on.
Yeah.
But no, that's definitely the long version, and I cannot take full credit. It's definitely something my assistant helped me with. So
it's a great bio, and it's a fitting one. It's a fitting one for all the things that you do.
Thank you.
And John is a senior associate at the firm. He has extensive experience in a variety of areas, and at Washington University School of Law, he excelled in all areas of study, graduating cum laude. John assists small businesses in FAR and SBA compliance issues, 8A program certifications, HubZone certifications, SDVOSB, transactional issues such as joint ventures, subcontracts, mentor-protege, teaming agreements, and regularly litigates GAO bid protests, size and status protests, and claims. John is also a regular contributor on government contracting legal topics on smallgovcon.com. So, John, just to follow suit, like, how far do you go with it when you're at a barbecue and somebody says, "What do you do?"
I usually just stick to I'm an attorney.
Not a bad move. Not a bad move.
Yeah, to this day, I have friends and family who, something might come up on the periphery of what I do, and they'll say, "What is it you do again?" And it's just not as easy as saying I'm an attorney, which clearly is not. And so, folks, Nicole and her firm and her associate, John, boy, they can answer just about any question that you could throw at them about federal contracting topics on this session today. We have a bunch of things we're going to talk about. I will just tell you, I've been, putting custom backgrounds here in Zoom, and, I guess I can't really zoom in, but this is a much younger iteration of me. This is my wife and I in Costa Rica in 2006. And I'm excited that we're going back to Costa Rica next month, this time with 3 kids between the ages of 9 and 14. And let's just say that, there's a lot more gray hairs, and I guess I'll have a lot more anxiety with 3 kids in Costa Rica.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
So what do you all have coming up that's exciting?
Well, we're planning a big family trip. I have not traveled with my entire family in ages, and it's never been with my children. We're going to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, which is just one of my all-time favorite places in the world. I've probably been 10 times. I speak some Spanish. I like to say I'm proficient, but I'm not fluent. So I really enjoy being there, but I will be traveling pretty far with a 2- and 3-year-old. So please send me advice, prayers, whatever you can do, because
have you flown with them before?
I have.
Okay, so This is one that I picked up, and I wonder if you've done this because you have the issue of like how much battery time do you have left,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Long day. What we like to do is we get a splitter for the earphones,
Oh,
and they
nice.
both watch the same thing with earphones because of the white noise in the plane. And then
Oh,
you
that's
have
great.
a second device with a battery. That's one that I always loved.
That's a great piece of advice. I like that. So I had someone give me another piece of advice. It was really good, which was to, if they didn't have like backpacks, to get them some little backpacks and put a bunch of things in there that they have never seen, little toys that are ones they can play with quietly. But that way, as you're on the plane, you're like, new toy, new toy. And they did really well when the plane was moving because they loved the airplane. They were so excited. It was being stuck on the runway for a while and having flight delays that really killed us. Chasing them through the airport, not recommended. Not recommended at all. Phoenix Airport was not happy with us.
Well, it's been over 20 years since I've been to Puerto Vallarta. I can't imagine what it's like now. It seemed like a paradise 20 plus years ago. Has a lot changed?
So the amazing thing about Puerto Vallarta that I've always been a fan of, now I haven't been in a few years, but is they've kept it, they've done a really good job of keeping it divided. They have Nueva Vallarta, which means New Vallarta, and they have Viejo Vallarta, which means Old Vallarta. And if you go to Viejo Vallarta, they still have cobblestone streets, they have flea markets, they have all the little hole-in-the-wall Mexican places that have the best food in the world. And then you can also cross over and go to Nueva Vallarta if you want to. The beaches are a little nicer. It's more like a Vegas-y area in Puerto Vallarta, all the big hotels that you would never have in old Mexico. So that's why I really like it, because you can kind of get a taste of both. And we're staying on the old side, of course, but we'll see.
With unlimited tortilla chips at every meal.
I love it. I cannot wait. I'm going to eat so many tacos. They're going to have to wheel me home.
So what about you, John? Anything fun coming up?
Oh, well, to be frank, at the moment, I'm mostly just kind of looking at my options, I suppose, on that end, but
Yeah.
pretty quiet on my part, but that's all right by me.
Well, that's just fine. So, folks, we're going to jump right into it. So, I think we have, and I'm sorry, I apologize if it's Michelle or Michael Daly. We're going to bring you on momentarily to talk about the Super 8A issue, and I know you wanted to talk about that. Then Alfred will call on you next, and I'll just tell you folks that this is a very casual environment. If I didn't speak to you before the session, if you'd like to ask a question, just raise your hand. Otherwise, if we did speak beforehand, we are definitely going to bring you on. And so let me bring you on, Michelle, and you can tell me if I'm saying your name correctly. And it looks like we're coming back in as a panelist. Any moment. Okay, and did I pronounce your name correctly once we have your audio?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. First of all, Nick, thank you so much for pronouncing my name correctly. Most people get it wrong. It is pronounced Michelle, French pronunciation of Michael. So I appreciate that. Most people don't pick that up. So thank you so much for that. Yeah, I wanted to talk about the Super 8A firms. My company just received its SBA 8A certification, and perhaps naively, we thought the playing field would be level for all 8A firms, only to discover that in addition to having an 8A certification, you can get additional certifications which sort of put you to the head of the pack, not the least of which is being a women-owned business, veteran-owned business, being in a hub zone, et cetera. But we also found that, and we learned this actually, but even before we got our certification, we had to, because of a court case in Tennessee, we had to submit a socially disadvantaged narrative in order to get the SBA certification. But when we were going through that process, we discovered that there were exempt entities, such as tribally owned firms, Alaskan Native corporations, Native Hawaiian organizations. And so our first question was, well, why are they exempt? And then when we got the certification, we discovered that those organizations were what is known as, or are what is known as Super 8A firms. And while there might be set-aside contracts for regular SBA firms of 4.5 million, there's set-aside contracts for Super 8A firms for 25 million. So I'm not an expert on what they are. In fact, my question is, how did that all come about? Again, because we were taken aback that the playing field isn't necessarily level for SBA firms. And in fact, when we asked an SBA representative from our district, from our regional office, how to compete against Super 8A firms, she said, you can't. Basically, she acknowledged that those firms have a very distinct advantage. And so, my question is, what's the history of that? How did that come about? And I know that, those firms, the members of those firms have been socially disadvantaged. But the question is, why did the government feel that they were more socially disadvantaged than other 8A entities?
Yeah, great question. And Michelle, before I turn it over to Nicole, I think it might help other audience members if you gave just like a super high level overview of what we're even talking about.
Yep, I can do that. So, I'm pretty sure everyone's familiar with the 8A program, but the 8A program is frequently referred to as, the SBA's golden child. It's a fantastic program. If you get into it, you're really kind of huge leg up in competing with other companies. So it used to be that anybody that qualified as socially disadvantaged based on certain races and ethnicities did not have to prove their social disadvantage for obvious reasons. We had Native Americans on there. We had African Americans. We had Asian Americans, all kinds of countries. Now, I will tell you some of the criticisms that I've read of the list is that it was not put together with a lot of thought, and that was part of the reason. So that's just kind of neither here nor there. But anyways, so when was it, John? Was it like July or?
It was
Tennessee
July,
case,
yeah,
July
it was like
of
late
last year.
July. Mm-hmm.
So what happened was a white woman who never tried to get into the 8A program, and I'm going to pause right there and tell you, I have so many white women that I have gotten into the 8A program prior to this change, because being a woman in business, it's you can write a narrative and very often get in. I don't think I've actually had any denied. But that said, she was very angry. She said she would never get into the 8A program. So she filed a case saying the 8A program was based on race and therefore needed heightened scrutiny from the district court in Tennessee. And the district court in Tennessee agreed with her, and they ordered the SBA to require all individuals to write narratives. They did not require Native entities to write narratives. And actually during that case, which is still, I think, kind of ongoing, because she's continued to submit orders or requests for orders. One of them, she even came back and said that this needs to apply to tribal 8As as well. But SBA's reasoning, which I was trying desperately to find somewhere where SBA explains it, but I can tell you what I was told because I was able to listen in to some very, very early and kind of private SBA conversations that, a couple law firms and PTACs or Apex accelerators were all kind of able to listen in. And it was basically stated that the tribal 8As don't have to write narratives because they are not in the 8A program based on social disadvantage. They basically don't need to meet that requirement. So it's not even that they're presumed socially disadvantaged. It's that a socially disadvantaged requirement only applies to an individual. And the reason that I have heard it is based on is that the tribal 8A entities' ability to be in the 8A program is based more on treaties and agreements between the governments and those federally registered tribes. So that is what I have been told. I really cannot find, if you go to SBA's website, it just flat out says tribal 8As are exempt from this. So, I mean, there's really not a lot of information out there as to why, but that's what I've been told.
That is truly fascinating, Nicole. And And I never knew, and obviously I know the history of treaties between the United States and sovereign Native American nations, but I never knew that piece, and that's fascinating. Michelle, follow-up questions based on that.
Yeah, I do have a follow-up question, and that is, you know, I'm not an expert historian or expert on treaties, but I've never heard that before. And when the SBA program was implemented by Richard Nixon or the Nixon administration in the 1970s, there was no mention of any treaties with tribally owned organizations. So, you know, I just scratched my head on that right now.
Yeah, and that's why I made very well sure to tell you that I cannot find anything online. Go ahead.
I was able to, sorry to interrupt. I was able to find a bit of some kind of news stories about specifically with regards to that.
What'd you find?
And my understanding is back in the 80s, the Reagan administration actually did a commission on sort of native reservation economics. And so there was a lot of focus and attention during these times, especially, you know, it was, well, you know, it's back when I was little, it felt like the 80s were long ago, but I guess everything back then is long ago now. But at the time, there was kind of there was this renewed focus on sort of those the mistreatment of natives in American history and things like that. And there was a focus on, you know, the current state of Native American tribes and, you know, what they're experiencing in the country. And so there was generally this sort of expansion of the program in the 80s to kind of go and to give them a specific benefit in light of there was really the trees were kind of part of it, but it's this kind of like this general kind of a feeling that since the government was so much like specific, the federal government specifically was so deeply involved in a lot of that, and why the situation is for them as it is now, that there was this sort of movement to give that benefit to native tribes. So that it's kind of is the most general summary of the history of it, to be frank. Obviously, there's more details out there.
Michelle, can I ask you, what do you do?
We provide professional services. So we're a firm that provides business advisory, communication services, and training, workforce development training. So it's a professional services organization.
Yes, and so I can see, at least certainly in the federal programs, how there would be a very broad spectrum of things that you're able to compete for. Are you also interested in state and local contracts? And I apologize for not knowing this, but do you have an account on our website?
I think I may have entered an account on your website recently. Yes, we started doing local government contracting work. So we were in the sort of the local. We're based in Washington, D.C. So our first contracts were with Washington, the District of Columbia government. We branched out. We've done some work in Maryland and Virginia, but this is our first foray into federal government contract.
Well, I'd like to ask a two-part question, and you're the first part of it, and Nicole and John would be the second part of it. So the first part of the question is, do you believe in the old expression, if you can't beat them, join them?
Yes, and in fact, my partner and I had a conversation about that yesterday, basically saying it is what it is. The regulations are what they are, and you know, maybe there's an opportunity to partner or subcontract with Native American or tribally owned concern.
Okay, so this hasn't come up before on a session, and it is a little bit of an esoteric point, but here's my question, folks. Are 8A firms allowed to mentor protege one another, or is it simply a matter of teaming arrangements?
8A firms can mentor protege one another, but they don't have to. They actually, because they are both considered small, because you have to be small to be 8A, you can just joint venture. And there are lots of good reasons. I actually work with a lot of tribal 8As, and they do partner with a lot of different 8As. And that's a really big benefit, because if you have a JV with two 8As, first of all, you're not going to have as tight of rules in there because you're both 8As. And most of the joint venture rules are that the 8A company performs this amount of work, the 8A company manages. So it would actually be a very easy joint venture. And then that still allows you to subcontract out significant amounts of the work, because the 8As are both doing that portion of the work they need to do. So I think that's a really good idea. And subcontracting is always great. but yes, I think I just want to add my 2 cents on kind of your thoughts here, because in my opinion, nobody that was on that list should have had to write a narrative. That's just my opinion. I thought that the 8A support of kind of affirmative action was a great benefit that program provided. And maybe I'm biased because I helped so many people that weren't on that list get into the program. So in my opinion, you should not have had to write a narrative, Michelle, and I'm sorry that you did. Especially given what many of my African American and Native American clients that had to write those had to bring up and talk about. It wasn't pleasant. So I am sorry that happened. I will say, I don't think the tribal 8As are in the clear just yet. I think there is a lot going on, so keep your eyes on that. The only other thing I'll say is, yes, the tribal 8As are exempt from a couple things, and social disadvantage is one. There's also some affiliation exemptions that are out there, but they do have some requirements that a normal 8A doesn't have. Also, there are things like having to make sure a certain amount of money benefits the tribe, goes straight to the tribe, not to the companies, but to the tribe. There's a lot of rules like that other 8As don't have. So I understand people's frustration, because tribal 8As can become big entities with the different affiliation exceptions, and they can win a lot of contracts that way. But I agree 100% with Nick. If you cannot beat them, join them. So that's a good advice.
And I wanted to add too quickly, a lot of it with that case, that the ultimate case is a lot of it really, I have to concur with Nicole. I think it's more just the circumstances they attack the specific regulation that speaks towards social disadvantage for other, ethnic minority and racial minority groups. Whereas the one that specifically refers to Native American groups and the rules of that is a different regulation. And so it just so happened that they attacked the one. And again, and then Nicole said, I would not be, if they haven't attacked the other, I'd be surprised, frankly, just based on what what their practice has been. It was more just a question of that they attacked that one, and the court can't then touch the other regulation, because the other statute, because that would be that would not have been a raised issue. So it couldn't be, raised in that court case, because that would be its own major problem. So it's really just kind of that's the route of attack that this company and their attorneys took. And it's just that was the way it went with that. I think it really is a case where it's not that they, I would be very frankly surprised that they were fine. Oh yeah, it's fine for the, the Native. I don't think they are at all. I think it is just that's just how it arose in terms of, the court had jurisdiction over that question. That's the question that was answered, and that was the one that was raised. So,
Michelle, I'm hoping that this sort of helps get to the crux of what you're wanting to know. Do you have any parting thoughts? And by the way, Alfred, we're coming to you next, right after we talk about some updates on size standards. But any parting thoughts, Michelle? And you can feel free to jump back on as we go through the rest of this session.
No, that's been very helpful. Thank you, Nicole and John. I appreciate that info. And, at this point, I'm just gathering information and I'm piecing it all together, and it's been very helpful. Particularly the comment that, this isn't over. Maybe they'll go back, maybe the people who filed the lawsuit will go back and, now they'll attack the tribally owned firm, which by the way,
they already have. The court just hasn't ruled on it yet. Yeah.
And I don't have anything against all the firms that had the exemption. My whole thing is, just let it be a level playing field. So I'm not against them having, the advantages that they have. I just question why one group was singled out to get more advantages than the other.
Okay.
No, yeah. That one I will try to go back and see if I can find some more guidance, and because no doubt would have been back in the day, there would have been Senate and House of Representatives committee hearings, because this was a whole thing where they probably addressed specifically that, and I wasn't able to get to that.
I'd love to know.
But yeah, I'll take a look at that, and if you get us your email, I could definitely get you, I'll take a look and just get you some guidance on just, hey, at least if nothing else, they can help elucidate kind of matter, because I understand that that question. We wish we could fully kind of answer that one, but yeah, we can get you to that.
Hey, Michelle,
Appreciate
I
it.
will take responsibility for putting you guys in touch. And if you ever want to take a look at some state and local leads, it sounds like you're very well connected federally. Reach out to me and we'll talk more about that. There's a million things on our website at the state and local level.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and stay with us. So Michelle's going to drop off as an attendee, and Nicole, I think what I'd like to do next is talk a little bit about size standards. I understand there's some changes coming. I know this happens from time to time, but maybe for the newer folks in the audience, maybe start with like why are NAICS codes or why are size standards even important?
Yeah.
And then tell us what's the update.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think John's actually probably a little more knowledgeable
Yeah.
on the updates, but I will
And
do I'll do the big picture overview. Yeah.
I did want to clarify one thing. I
Yeah.
looked back at that Fed Register's the language on this upcoming regulatory agenda, and I want to note that I completely, this is my mistake here, is those site standard changes were completed actually. So those are it's worth noting. Yeah, it's important clarification.
That's
to make,
great.
obviously. But the concepts are very similar, of course. Obviously, is the principle is the same about why they change and how they change. So we'll be able to kind of go
Yeah.
over that.
Yeah. So essentially, every federal government contract has a NAICS code assigned to it. That is a North American Industry Classification System code, NAICS. And it rhymes with the word snakes. And if you say the word NAICS correctly, you are already a leg up in the government contracting world. I cannot tell you how many times we've had contracting officers, SBA representatives, people that should know how to say the word, asking about NAICS codes, or I can't even, some of them are wild. It's NAICS. It rhymes with snakes. So each federal government contract has one of those codes, and those codes have a size standard that is assigned to it. So it's something you can look up. SBA's rules have the list in the rules actually, but you can also just Google, current NAICS code size standards. Just make sure you're looking at either the NAICS code manual, the official NAICS code sites, or the SBA sites, because they do get updated regularly. So basically what happens is the code will say 15 million or 19 million or 35 million or whatever, and that is the size for that contract. So only people whose companies fall under those annual receipts can bid on that. There is also employee-based NAICS code size standards that say, 100 employees, 500 employees, whatever. Same thing there. Only if you qualify as that are you able to bid on those contracts. So it's a small business set aside. It has a NAICS code. Now, why do we have to update those? Well, because we have a world where inflation is a very real thing, and we do not want to be kicking small businesses out of practice simply because the world around them is getting more expensive and they are getting a little bit bigger. So it's intended to be updated regularly so that we're kind of following the trends of the economy. And I'll let John talk a little bit about the actual ones that just happened.
How many changed?
So I was trying to get the specific because it jumped around a bit, but the changes in question, there was a number, and it also, I want to note, it changed some of these thresholds when it comes to things like economic disadvantage and things like that. So there was a number of changes. Generally, what it appears is they kind of go through almost all of them, really, when it comes to these sorts of size standards, although they will take it on themselves to sort of change them on an as needed basis. So there's generally, of course, what we do see over time, because if I was to go through each single one, this would take forever. What we do see though is that generally over time they increase naturally, just because they are most tied to inflation and changes like that. Generally, the numbers just get bigger over time. I actually did a post back in 2022. I was just pulling it up here, where I kind of go over what, how they kind of look at it. And obviously I will say I can say this when it comes to the general trend for this most recent changes, it was a bit more sizable than a lot of past ones, because as we all know, there's been a lot more inflation. There's been a lot that's happened in the past few years that's really adjusted things. So they'll look at things, like average, the biggest one obviously they look at is average firm size. They just kind of get a general picture of, hey, how big are firms in this industry generally, to get a sense of, what's the norm for the industry is, if something, obviously ones that are on the, smaller compared to the average, more likely to be, you would consider a small business naturally. You'll look at things, such as how much it costs to get start up. One I always remember, I can't remember the specific number for it right now, but I know it's pretty large, is for the nuclear power generation NAICS code, obviously that one's going to be a lot larger than, one for soybean farming, just in terms of the intensity of, what it takes to get started to begin with anyways. So I will say just in general, it has increased. There's just been a general increase, and it's been a bit larger compared to a lot of past ones. So.
Well, and I appreciate hearing that, because this is something I know that happens from year to year. And before I ask a follow-up question, I know there's an audience member, James. He signed up late for the webinar. James, could you do me a favor if you're listening? Raise your hand if you'd like to engage with us on this, because I think your questions may be related to this, and we'll bring you on. But one question I have is, are the size standard updates predictable, or is it ad hoc based on economic factors?
So the update, in general, they do kind of go in a pattern of over every few years or so, if that's what you mean by that. But there are times where, extreme circumstances, especially because they recently kind of did another change to a year earlier in November 2022 because of the inflation issues and the high rates of inflation. So it can be ad hoc. They generally kind of go in a pattern of every few years to adjust based on, hey, here's the general trend. But if things do change rapidly, SBA will take it on themselves to, make an adjustment. But obviously whether they do that or not, that part is of course at the discretion. But they will, of course, then whenever they do raise the issue, they will happily accept comments on, to get an idea of what's going on. So.
Yep. And they rotate which size standards they analyze every time they do an update. So that some change. It's not that they all change at once. Some change, right, and then others change. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. And James, we're waiting for your audio. Just try to get it so that you're able to join us. But while we're waiting, it's really interesting. There's a tie-in with the 8A stuff, right? Because it's my understanding that people are constantly fighting over the size standards. Are they not? That doesn't happen quite often.
So what happens, at least on our end, is we do get the occasional people come to us and they want to protest, and or I guess it would be a size protest or a NAICS appeal. So basically what they would say is, if you can logically make the argument that the wrong NAICS code is applied to something, and yes, it's usually being argued because of the size standard. It's not usually being argued for any other reason. So either the agency assigned a big size standard, a big NAICS code, and the smaller companies that usually compete for this work under a smaller NAICS code are angry. So they will file a NAICS code appeal, and those go to OHA, I believe, right? Directly to OHA, or do they go to
they would go
directly to OHA? I thought so. Yeah. Sorry, there's a whole bunch of weird things that have to go to the CO and then OHA and stuff. But anyways, it goes straight to OHA, and that's SBA's Office of Hearings and Appeals. And so those are either argued because it's too big and the small businesses are saying, hey, this is the wrong NAICS code, and it's allowing all these large businesses to come, and large or just larger small businesses, but come in and take our work. And so there's NAICS codes filed on that basis. Now there's also NAICS codes appeals filed where the opposite. It is a bigger NAICS code most of the time. All these companies do this work, and then the agency changes the NAICS code to a smaller one, a smaller size standard, and then you get those same appeals, but for different reasons, saying, hey, this is the wrong NAICS code, and I can't even compete for it because it's the wrong NAICS code. So yeah, I mean, they're fought over pretty often. It's definitely a thing. And I think was it you, Nick, or was it someone else? We were talking about how someone did statistics on how, was it you? How many times I thought it was, how many times the wrong NAICS code was applied to a contract. And they were fascinating statistics. And I think, frankly, there's a ton out there that don't get appealed. They don't get brought to court, that are probably wrong, but nobody cares, because you kind of have to have that, reason to care. But it's pretty fascinating. And John and I both have gotten several cases where we've looked at it and said, this is so the wrong NAICS code. It's crazy. Like, it'll say architecture and the whole solicitation will be about engineering, and we're like, I don't understand this. So it's true that they are not correct all the time, and I would definitely encourage you all as government contractors, if you have a contract that you want to bid on and you feel like competition's too big, or you're not able to bid because of the NAICS code, and you do think there's a possible better NAICS code, it's worth looking at. It's worth checking out.
Well, I
do
know
wanna-
James has a question about NAICS codes. James, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Absolutely. Welcome to MyGovWatch Live. Where are you joining us from and what do you do?
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm here with Claudia. We're in San Antonio, Texas. My company is Vinova Consulting Group. Main things that we do are going to be software development and IT.
Okay, great. Great. And what questions did you have around NAICS codes? I think that was something that you mentioned.
Yes, I hear Claudia. Well,
Hi, Claudia.
yes, we have our capabilities translate a lot with government. We're new in government. We're doing a lot, mostly commercial now, but we noticed that even our cap statement was only with the codes, but no with the keywords. So now we're learning all this world. I have to put the keywords and make sure that we also look in our contracts that maybe they're not listing our next codes.
Next code.
You know, yes. So I think what you guys are talking is very important. But now we're also looking into getting our AA certification and EDWSD. And we have a lot of questions about that, but I don't know if this is the forum to ask those questions.
This is exactly the forum to answer those questions. But before you go further, Claudia, I'm just curious, are you interested solely in federal contracts or state and local also? Because some of this information, some of the answers will only apply federally.
Yes, federal is what we want.
Okay. So what NAICS code do you believe is associated with your business? Was it easy to identify?
Yes, it's computer design programs. And I have the number in a minute, I'll tell you.
Gotta go here.
So we're looking to we thought that getting through the EDWSB route will be better, and then we sent all the paperwork to the SBA, and they already respond, but they didn't deny it, but they said that we need more information in terms of if that I have another company and make sure that I'm only working on this, but that was a different. So we right now, so we don't know if we really don't care about EDWSB because the NAT codes are not related to what we do. But do you think it's important since we're already doing that? I don't know if it makes sense.
Yeah,
So-
no, that makes sense. It's a great question. And I'll start. One of the first things I wanted to note is don't be worried that you got a feedback letter from the SBA. I have yet to meet a single person who filed for any SBA certification and simply got a yes or no. It doesn't happen. It's part of the vetting process. They will literally invent questions if they don't have them. And it is important. It's to make sure that you're going to be responsive and you're really serious about it. And if it is a question like that, where they're talking about, your relationship to another company, that can be kind of a tricky one. So, I'm not at all pushing my firm, but I do recommend talking to a government contracts attorney, even if it's just about a couple questions SBA had, because that can be where they get you on if you're not super familiar with the affiliation rules or the control rules. That is a basis for denial. If they will say, you have another company that controls you or something like that.
Well,
So
yeah, that's good. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have any movement, and I already closed the company. I don't know if I went too far.
Oh, nice. Oh, that's great. No, that's another thing that I think is a really common misconception that I would love to tell everybody. It's a common misconception that if you file an application for an SBA status and they say your operating agreement's wrong or you have this other company or whatever, and you take an action to fix it. So you fix your operating agreement, maybe you kick someone out of your company that they don't like, whatever it is. It's not, they don't look at that as, oh, well, now you're compliant. That's fine. They expect that. They expect you to do whatever you can to get in. That is just fine. I've had lots of clients say, do I need to send in all 5 operating agreements we've had? And most of the time, no, it's just the new one. That's all they care about. So the other thing, the EDWSB. So it's a great status to have, period. Agencies have quotas on what they need to award. So even if you don't match up with the EDWSB NAICS codes, generally, agencies can still see that you're an EDWSB and use that to their benefit. So it's still a benefit when you're bidding because they can then check that on their quota. So it's still helpful. The other thing, if you are able to get in the EDWSB program, dun, 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 dun. The next step, in my opinion, should be the 8A program because the requirements are so very similar.
Yes, and we're planning to do that.
Great.
I called my CPA this morning and I said, when you gonna have my taxes? And she said, I will put priority on yours, so it will be like in 2 weeks time.
Great.
So I think I should wait for the taxes to reapply for the EDWSB and then apply for the AA. Am I right?
Well, you are more than able to, as long as you're in good standing with the IRS, the SBA is okay with it. So you can file and include your tax extension, that you have an extension to file.
Oh, no.
Or you can just say, we don't have those taxes yet. What will happen is SBA will say, okay, great, send them over when you have them.
Oh, the taxes are for this year, so I'm correct.
Yeah, that's okay. All you say is, I don't have them yet, and they are not going to pause your application or anything. They're going to look at, if they don't have those taxes yet, when they go to calculate size and stuff, they will look at the last ones before that.
Okay.
They may ask you for kind of a current, I've seen them do this before, John, maybe you know what they call it, but it's kind of like a current where you think you're at, what you think your taxes are going to say, just so they can, yep, just so they can kind of use that in their calculations. But it doesn't matter that you don't have those yet. You can proceed and file those when you have them.
Okay, it's not that gonna help me to get those status or anything anyway. So okay, so I should just go ahead and do it. And then yeah, definitely I would like to know more about the AA help that you can do for us. And
Yeah, I'll put something up at the end that tells you all the different ways you can follow us and contact us. And on there is also going to be our blog. And once the big Ultima case happened, we got so much 8A movement that we actually made an entire 8A landing page on our blog. So it's smallgovcon.com. And if you go there and click on the 8A toolkit, it's great free information on the 8A program. And then yes, please feel free to contact us and we can talk about ways we can help.
And also, folks, I will generate an email connecting you after the session as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Thank you for joining.
Oh, sorry, Nick. I just have a question about your service, and I think it's really important because, it was talked about that the NAICS codes and the keywords, they don't match sometimes on the bids. You guys talked a little bit more about that. And for example, when you're looking to SAM.gov or USA Spending, and you're looking under for contract opportunities or who buys what you sell, and you're looking by NAICS code, it's also, but you said in another part, it's the information is only as good as the people that are putting that information. So sometimes it doesn't match.
Yes.
And I wanted to learn a little bit more about your service, because you're talking about business intelligence, AI, how it predicts other NAICS codes that they may be using incorrectly and point you to the right direction.
Yes. So James, let me just give you a quick rundown. So we operate MyGovWatch.com. I don't know if you have a trial on it. Maybe you are, but we'll talk about that offline. But essentially, we have a value add for SamGov, and it's twofold. One, if you use our site, we're mirroring SAM, but you don't have to go to SamGov every day and spend an hour searching, because we're doing the searching on the back end for you and just sending you an email every morning. So that's the first thing. The second is that we're using some of the data points around each record to figure out which things you should see every morning in a way that we believe is proprietary and unique. So if you'd like to engage in that conversation, I'll send you an email offline and we can talk more about it. But the fact that came up is that up to 40% of NAICS code assignments are wrong on SamGov, which means as they get through the procurement cycle, and then when they report the spending later on who bought what you sold, there's a pretty good chance that it's not entirely accurate. So James, I appreciate that question, and we can engage after this on our product.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining. We have Alfred coming up, we have Harry coming up, and we also have Taylor coming up. And what I'd like to do is just stop there. And I know we were going to talk about something else, Nicole and John, and it had to do with the disabled veteran community. I'm not sure if we have any disabled vets going on, but I understand there's a major change that's been coming in who administers the certification. Can you tell us about that and what's been happening?
Yeah, no problem. John, you want to start or you want me to?
Sure, I can.
Go for it.
Basically, and the important thing here is that the change, in fact, has occurred. So back in 2000,
2.
can't two 22. I mean, I know, yeah, the change was
I think it was
the change
22.
occurred.
Yeah.
Yeah, the change occurred from the transition from the year 2022 to 2023. So basically, on January 1st, 2023, it was the VA who used to handle SDVOSB certification. By Congress is like, nah, we're going to give this to SBA, and so that transition occurred on January 1st, 2023. Now, one other important thing with that is it used to be that for many things you could self-certify as a service disabled veteran-owned small business
For
SDVOSB.
any non-VA contracts.
Any non-VA contract. This got rid of that. It basically says, nope, no more self-certification. Now, obviously, there's a lot of companies that, were self-certified. And so, they were like, well, we don't want to leave those them in the lurch completely. Like, basically, hey, everyone do this right now. Obviously, that would terribly back up the system. So there was a grace period where if you were self-certified in 2020, if you were already self-certified, basically then you could stay self-certified from 2023 until the beginning of 2024. And you could still do that. You could still do that. And there's another thing is that if you got your application in to get finally certified with the SBA before the end of 2023, basically until that application is completed, you could still then self-certify even into this year. So there are people who are still relying on that self-certification out there who, because they got their application in before the start of 2024. And basically it's just a matter of when that decision comes in on, obviously, if they're certified, great, that's issue. But then if they're not, then they can no longer self-certify. So that's the big thing there. So, and Nicole, you were looking recently at a decision that kind of regarded that grace period. So you can kind of tell about that.
Yeah. And actually it's going to be an upcoming blog here any minute. But yeah, I think it's the first, I just don't want to be wrong. So I'm going to say it's one of the first, but likely the first case that's actually talked about this grace period. And one of the things that I found most interesting is the OHA actually kind of gave this company 3 chances. So what happened in a nutshell is there was a small business set aside, but it had kind of like a preference for SDVOSBs. So it said if there was enough SDVOSBs and they could compete at a fair market price, it would give it to one of those. It said if there wasn't, it would go to a small business. So it was kind of tricky. But what happened was someone said, hey, we're a WSB, SDVOSB, here's our price. It was a great low price. And it was the lowest of the SDVOSBs, but it was not the lowest of all the small businesses. So OHA looked at it and they looked and saw that the company was never certified. But again, as John said, you don't have to be certified necessarily right now. This was not a VA contract. So the second part would be looking to see, did they submit some kind of application to SBA for SDVOSB prior to December 31st, 2023? And if they did, they could be okay. Well, OHA looked and saw absolutely nothing. And what I figured is the case would end there. So what was interesting to me is OHA then turned to the company itself and said, can you prove to me that you are an eligible SDVOSB? Which I thought was kind of surprising, because if I'm OHA, I'm saying, hey, SBA gave you 2 rules, you didn't follow either, you're out. And they said, tell us, are you veteran owned and veteran run? And funny enough, the company said, no, we just have a SDVOSB teaming partner. So they're lucky that they're not in more trouble, and who knows, they may be, because it is absolutely against several laws and actually statutes to claim that you are a status that you're not. And it can be very dangerous. You can actually end up in trouble with the False Claims Act, and you don't want that to happen. But this is a big case because we kind of had no idea how OHA was going to look at it. And it does seem like kind of in the spirit and policy of, look, we understand that we just shook up everything. And those of you that were either like certified before or self-certifying before had big old rock thrown into the mix. It's kind of a gentler approach. And I don't know if it's going to be that way for everyone, but that was what one of the first cases about the grace period. That's kind of how it was handled. So
it's impossible to keep up with this stuff if you're a layperson.
You
You have to have a firm that focuses on this stuff every day to keep track of it. One question I have is a follow-up. Were there long backlogs during COVID with the different certification programs? And are we beyond that? Like I've had some different interactions with federal and state government where there were backlogs, in other matters unrelated to the business. But are there backlogs, and is there like a new normal where everything is just backlogged?
That's a great question. I'll let John chime in too, but in our experience, yes. And honestly, I'm not sure that it was necessarily just during COVID. I think we had some backlog before that. I'm thinking of my founding partner's he wrote a blog on mentor protege agreements and how at one point in time you could expect a response in about 9 days. And then he wrote a blog, I believe right before COVID. Don't quote me, but I'll figure it out. John, if you can find that blog, that'd be awesome. But he basically said that now you can expect over 100 days for a response for your mentor protege agreement. And that might not sound like a huge deal, but the amount of companies that decide, a month before a proposal is due that they want to work together on that proposal. And if one of those companies is large, and this is an important thing, even though it's a bit off track here, if one of those companies is large, you need a mentor protege agreement. I kind of touched on that earlier, but just to clarify, if you have a large and a small, you have to have an approved MPA in place before you get the JV, and then you can compete for that work. Now, if you don't have a large business, you can just JV and compete for the work. Nobody has to review the JV unless it's an 8A sole source award. So everybody joint venturing, moving fast. If you need that MPA, you can't wait 100 days if you have something due in a month. So it was significantly longer than it was before. Well, weirdly enough, it's funny that you asked this because just like yesterday or day before, we had a client reach out and say, is this a record? They had their MPA approved in days. Was it days or weeks?
Yeah.
Wow.
So I feel like we're seeing things moving a little faster. I feel like SBA's 8A program there was a period, probably COVID period, where it was moving very slow. Clients would ask me, hey, what should I expect for this? How long is this going to take? Well, I said, well, for us, it's not going to take very long. We can get this stuff to you next week. It is going to take you a long time with SBA because they'll do that back and forth with the feedback before you get an answer. But I feel like those have shortened. I feel like the SDVOSB, I think, has a significant issue going on right now. It's one that one of my clients brought to my attention, which is the VA has to, there was a change in the regulations that I didn't even know about. And I don't know if anybody did really. It was very sneaky. The regulations used to say you could be deemed service disabled with a DOD certificate or a VA certificate. Well, in a very sneaky little something that wasn't even mentioned in most of the rulemaking talk, the new SBA rules, which we have a lot of blogs on those if you want to know what the differences are. I don't want to waste time on that. There are some differences. Overall, the big requirements are still the same, but there's a few differences. One of them is they just erase the word DOD. So it now says VA has to verify you. And I have clients with DOD verification, and they reached out to VA really early on and said, hey, we need you to do this so we can get this done at SBA. And VA is apparently majorly backlogged in verifying people's service disabilities. So that's really the big holdup in that program for a lot of people. You understand DOD would be the first to give you the certificate a lot of times because it's DOD that you were working for. So just something good to keep in mind. If you are looking to do that right now, you do have to have that VA certification. But everything else, yes, I'm hoping it's a new normal. We've seen a lot of this over the years. So I'm really hoping the new normal is faster response times. I know SBA admitted that they really had to beef up their 8A program staff because they needed reviewers for narratives because it's not an easy task. And I can tell you how different all these different narrative reviewers are because one says something's perfect, another one says something very similar is just totally wrong. It's unique, but it's still more people, it's more answers quicker, and you've always got the ability to go appeal if you feel that you were denied unfairly. So
yeah, and they all think that they are reviewing to a single standard, and they're shocked to learn that maybe other people might see it differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And it's hard. It is hard. Writing those narratives is hard. Reviewing those narratives is hard. It is not an easy task. And I've spent years studying those narratives because they are not easy.
Yeah. Well,
And I was-
Alfred, I know, I'm sorry, go ahead, John.
I was able to get that blog
Thank you.
post at our
Yeah.
founder, Steve Koprince. That was September 15th, 2021. So it was a little after, obviously, like obviously the biggest time of COVID, obviously in 2020, but it
Okay.
was still in the ongoing time.
Early on, but yeah, okay. So yes, I think you're right, Nick. I think very much COVID caused a lot of slowdown.
Well, no surprise that it's no surprise that the private sector is, it's never a reason for someone on the private sector side that, that something hasn't happened yet. No surprise there. So Alfred, welcome. We just need you to unmute and we would like to hear from you. And welcome to MyGovWatch Live. Where are you joining us from and what do you do?
I'm from Southeast Texas, and I'm a service disabled veteran-owned small business. And we
Fantastic.
Right.
Thank you for your service and thank you for joining us in such a timely manner.
Thank you. So my business provides specialty construction, mainly electrical. So we do commercial HVAC, pretty much anything that has electricity running through it, from generators to the full construction, running power grids for an entire military base. But a bunch of nerdy electronic stuff. So my question has to do with subcontracting rules. So the general rules, I get that. When it comes to services, there's a threshold. When it comes to supplies, general construction, specialty construction, there's certain, like, this has got to be 75%, can't exceed 85%. Let me give you a scenario. So if I have Department of Interior that wants me to install, I don't know, backup generators or water fountains or whatever it is, that would be a supply thing. But the services of the install are under services, but they have two different thresholds. Minus the cost for supplies. So when you're providing a service and you're providing supplies, in that scenario, what rule do you go with? Because depending on what it is, like if it's interpreted one way, I'm not even bidding the contract. I'll let somebody else handle that one.
It's a
So-
real great question. Go ahead,
Yeah.
John. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so the regulation actually does it that speaks to limitations in subcontracting. 13 CFR 125.6 actually speaks exactly that situation. It's called mixed contracts. It says where any contract integrates, any combo of services, supplies. What depends on is the NAICS code that the contracting officer chooses. That NAICS code that they choose, basically, if it's one that is a supply type one, like a manufacturing code, or specifically like goes to supplies, it's going to be a supply contract under those rules. When it comes to if they choose one that's speaks to more services, it's going to be a services one. And obviously then there's also, of course, if it's a construction sort of thing, then you'll get the construction one and that sort of thing. So that's basically how it is. You'll want to look at the NAICS code. And one thing, and I have seen, and it's funny, the thing is they say that, and I've looked at it, but it's funny because the NAICS codes themselves, all those rules, they don't actually say, well, is this specifically then a services one? So you kind of have to look at it as, with the descriptions of, because there's also descriptions of, what the industry kind of does, things like that. Like if it describes like the industry is like one of, providing services, then that kind of tells you, okay, this is a services NAICS code versus like say if it's a manufacturing one, or if it's a wholesale thing or something like that, that tells you supply. There's also ones that are generally just mentioned just items. Those are going to be kind of supply NAICS code. So again, so you want to look at the NAICS code and that'll tell you which of the ones, applies.
Yep, that was a very great overview right there. The only thing I want to add is because the regulatory language is shockingly not super clear, but it mentions how if it's a mixed contract, yes, the agency has to pick. So the agency picks a NAICS code and says, we're going to go with services. Now, sidebar, don't forget, if you're looking at this solicitation and you're thinking to yourself, this is not primarily services, this is primarily supplies or whatever, that's a NAICS code appeal. You're able to talk to it. And I just don't recommend filing one of those on your own because they're highly technical, but they're also not something that takes us much time. It's something you kind of fire off and you hold off and see what happens. It's not like a GAO protest where you're involved and costs just keep adding up. So NAICS appeal is a way to handle that. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, if they say it's supply or it's services and not supplies, then you also do not count any portion of that contract that is supplies. The limitation on subcontracting only counts to the services part. And that's very important because a lot of contractors don't get that and they feel, oh, this huge amount, and it's just the amount that the government is paying for the services, if that's what the NAICS code chosen is. And it says they will never put more than one limitation on subcontracting requirement on the same contract. So if you ever have a CO say, hey, we need you to follow limitation on subcontracting for the services and non-manufacturer rule for the supplies, you can tell them to kick rocks because it's not allowed to have more than one limitation there. That's all I got.
That makes perfect sense. Like,
Right.
I haven't had it explained like that before, but it just becoming an extra that.
We take a
Yeah.
lot of pride in
Mhm.
making sure things are plain English. You'll find that we very rarely talk in legalese. We also have books and blogs that do not use legalese. That was another thing Stephen Koprince, our founding member, was very firm about. So yes, we will give you the real world answer, and it's based on regulations. So
I did have one more question. It's not the subcontract, it's more the 8A thing. I have a colleague that I use for subcontracting that's looking to get into the federal side, and he was asking me about the 8A socially disadvantaged group inclusion stuff. And he asked me, he's like, hey, it seems like it's so watered down, just about anybody can get in. So I could be a white male, but I'm homosexual, so I'm in. Or I could be 1/8, or my wife is 1/8 Native American, so I'll just put the business in her name, which means everybody can get in, kind of thing. And I was like, I don't think it works that way. Common sense says it doesn't, but then again, maybe it does.
no, so I will say, it does seem a bit like in response to this decision in Tennessee that says now everybody has to write a narrative. It's kind of and this is just opinion, but it's kind of our opinion based on our experience that SBA has eased up a bit on these narratives. To give you kind of hard facts for that, they used to have you write the social disadvantage narrative, and it basically said, give us everything. If you have any instance in your life where you had bias or discrimination, you were unequally paid, you were unequally, promoted, anything like that, give us all of it. And so we had some of these 20, 30-page narratives going out because we were darn sure we were going to prove social disadvantage, and they were hard to write. I've had many people hand me something to review that moves you to tears. It's a beautiful narrative, but does it fit SBA's regulations? Probably not, because SBA wants very, very strict things. They want the event with all the details. They want to know how you know it was bias or discrimination, and then they want to know the long-term impact, and that's all they want. So what they've done recently since the Tennessee case is they've said, now you only need 2 instances. We don't want more than 2. We kind of gave it some tries early on because the SBA regulations still say, if you go look up the rules, they still say that there's disadvantaged groups that are presumed disadvantaged. That's not true anymore. And they still say, the narrative is this way. So we thought, maybe this new guidance is just guidance and they don't care. So right away when they issued this guidance, I think we submitted 2 or 3 narratives that were more old school, more other style. Why? Because we had just drafted them for our clients, and I didn't want to rebill my clients to draft another narrative unless I needed to. So we sent those off. I think the first one actually got approved, but then the next 2 were immediately sent back, and they said, hey, we have this new guidance. It can only be 2. You have to do it this way. So that said, it can be easier to get in because you don't have to think of 20 different things. 2. They want 2. Now, can anybody get in? I don't think it's that easy. I've had Most people that identify with some kind of ethnic minority, whether it's 1/8 or whether it's, my parents, I was adopted into a Mexican family, things like that can be used. Homosexuality, I hadn't seen any like OHA cases on it. I personally proudly got 2 women in on that basis. So yes, and I've gotten a lot of women in just because of being women in the industry and being sometimes treated differently. There's a chance for anybody to get in. I have helped, I want to say maybe 2 white males get in. Typically, it's been based on some kind of disability. And if it's tied to a service disabled disability or a service disabled issue, then you are able to sometimes make the argument that, and I'm just going to throw this out there, that you have been treated differently because people see that you have a service disability and you're a veteran, and they assume things about you, like maybe you have PTSD or trauma, maybe you're unstable. I've written narratives like that and had success. So throwing that out there for your sake right now, for your buddy's sake, if wife is 1/8 Native American and identifies, that's really kind of the important thing there. Because if she were to go, and that's if she wants to go the route of race. Now, she can say I'm Native American in her narrative and say, but really the bad treatment I've received has been because I'm a woman. When SBA required all the current participants to write narratives, they didn't just say every new person. They said, if you're in the 8A program and you're an individual, you have to write a narrative. So I had tons and tons of African-American and Native American clients come to me and say, I can't think of anything, frankly, that has to do with my race, but I can think of 20 things because I'm a woman or other reasons. And that's okay. You can have gotten in for that reason and then have a different reason. The best advice I can give is, if you can think of 2 instances of bias and discrimination, and those words are really key because a lot of people confuse, I promise I'm almost done. A lot of people confuse social disadvantage with disadvantage generally. And I've had so many narratives say, hey, I'm disadvantaged because I have ADHD and I have dyslexia and I have this and I have that. But you have to be very careful to say, it's not that I had those things that held me back. It's that if anybody found out I had those things, they immediately treated me different. So that's really the big catch that people don't get. So if your buddy or your buddy's wife has 2 events that have to do with bias or discrimination, give it a shot.
Yeah, I would say, and to add to that, I'd say that is and that is a challenge. I would also say that's really more specific to disabilities, where there are, admittedly, there's disabilities that can affect your actual performance. So that is just simply a reality of the situation. Whereas obviously, biases, treatment of someone simply because, well, they're Black, that's why that's why this company said they could do it. That's going to be much more easy, obviously, than to say, well, they couldn't do it because they were, physically incapable of performing the work or something like that. Obviously, those sorts of situations where it's not that anyone, is like, no, it's not that we held it against you, just that you can't do it. Those sorts of situations exactly are the ones it's like, look, I feel, we feel bad, but it's not social disadvantage. It's not discrimination based on it. That's simply because you couldn't do the performance. And it is indeed very difficult to, sometimes distinct. It can be very blurry, frankly.
Yeah.
And another thing too is, I would say too, is with regards to the narratives, how it's switched to this 2 system. Yet it definitely, it was a short period of it. Definitely, it was kind of some of the reviewers. I feel at this point, I do feel like it's pretty clear, like this is the standard for now, as long as this is going on, at least, or until unless something else changes, or the SBA issues something else. This is the standard now. I think it's the 2 examples. I think it's pretty solid, if it's not, even though it's not actually expressly stated in any regulations.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
Well, Alfred, thank you for joining us, and please stay with us. If you have any other questions, we can try to tag them on at the end. Just a question for Nicole and John very quickly. We still have 2 or 3 people who I know wanted to speak with us today. Do you all have a hard stop at 90 minutes?
No.
Okay.
No, we always schedule a little block after just in case. So
okay,
we're good.
I will just tell you, Michelle, we will be bringing you back on. I see you've raised your hands. Frankie, we'd like you to raise your hand because I think we don't understand your question, or maybe pose the question in response to what I had wrote in the answer to the question you typed. And Taylor, we're coming to you as well. So Harry, welcome to the call. Can you hear us?
Yes, of course. Can you hear me?
Yes, welcome. Where are you joining us from and what do you do?
I'm out of Los Angeles.
Okay, and just for the sake of anyone who doesn't know, what do you do?
So I do what's called investor relations. We help small cap and mid cap publicly traded companies gain exposure on Wall Street, and in doing so, we also represent. We help our clients gain business where possible. So we also act as a kind of a biz dev, external biz dev team for them.
And so, are your questions about your business or about a client's business?
Actually, for our client specifically.
Okay. Tell us
yeah.
a little bit about the client and what questions you have.
Company's name is Dunamis Charge. It's the first African American female-owned EV charging manufacturer in the world. They've gotten huge amounts of publicity with Forbes, Bloomberg. That they just were introduced by President Biden at an SBA conference, at the Women's SBA conference in Washington D.C. And it's interesting because the amount of exposure that they've received, probably more than most of their billion-dollar competitors, yet they haven't sold one charger to date. And it's all, I'm guessing, because of the minority business enterprise status and all these dollars that are being allocated by the administration, which we're trying to pursue on their behalf.
Well, it's a fascinating business, and I will just tell you that we are just seeing the EV need, especially at the state and local level. It's growing by leaps and bounds. I mean, we have a charging station in my town now, and it seems like every week there's a half a dozen RFPs out there about EV charging. So are there particular questions that may have to do with federal contracting that you would like answered for your clients?
Sure. So first, I just want to thank you, Nick, for putting this together. This has been, I can't tell you how informative this has been. Thank you, both of you, for participating. And I hope we can do this again. But I have so many questions, and I'll try to keep it limited to just a couple. My first question is about the certification. So if we have certification at the parent company level, but the subsidiary does not do, how do we approach that? Do we need to recertify or reapply?
So are you referring to that your parent company has like one of these socioeconomic?
Yeah, we have MB minority business enterprise certification at the parent company for a female-owned and minority owned, but not at the subsidiary level.
Okay, because my general seeing is, and there may be some differences with that, because that's technically not like one of the SB,
I think it's a state. I think it's a state certification.
So we want to be careful that. I will say this when it comes to the federal certifications, each entity has its own certification. And that's very important, especially when it comes to like 8As and stuff, because the 8A disadvantaged owner can only use that 8A status once, for example. So that is very important to keep clear that, when it comes to choosing that for whoever, the company, because someone who owns an 8A company, obviously, there's other considerations with affiliation, which we're not going to go into here, but someone who owns a company, they can own other companies. There's no rule, that's intrinsically against that. It is, there's other considerations there. But when it comes to which company they want to have the 8A status, they need to choose that very carefully for, which company they think that's the one that's, that would get the most benefit from it. Because once they use it for that status, for that 8A status, they can't use it. They can't go it for another company. And that, and also that's just that company's.
I did not know that. Okay. So only one company can have that status?
When it comes to disadvantaged owner. Now, when it comes to things like women-owned small businesses, service-disabled veteran-owned small business status, things like that, you can technically. Sometimes it's really hard with the regulations because they have like the manager has to full-time manage it, and so there are ways. For example, the person who owns it doesn't have to be the person that manages it for those. That's one thing to consider. So but all that said, for each one though, it's status. So if your parent company is a WSB is a certified WSB, that does not mean that that every subsidiary is one. Each subsidiary would have to go get the certification itself. And
actually, if it's a wholly owned subsidiary, it's not going to get the certification, because if it's owned by an entity, if it's something is wholly owned by an entity, it can't get certified as a WSB, SDVOSB, 8A. It could maybe be a super 8A if it was tribal affiliation. But yeah, there's requirements and all there of direct ownership. And that means you cannot own a company through another company or through a trust or anything like that. You have to own it directly. So yeah, a wholly owned subsidiary cannot get the same status. And this is on a federal level. Maybe on your state level, there are far more relaxed requirements for some of the state certifications. But I would say definitely pursue 8A. I would say definitely pursue economically disadvantaged woman-owned small business or woman-owned small business. There's no reason not to. I had a client the other day come to me and say, John and I helped him with his SDVOSB. He said it's been 1 year since they gave it to him, and he went from a $1 million a year company to a $15 million a year company. And that's very common. We have a lot of clients come to us and say, man, that was a lot of work, but now that I'm in the program, we're doing great. So,
okay, yeah.
Yep.
But I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I don't quite understand this though. You're saying that if I have a company, we'll call it company A, and I have and I own the subsidiary, or we won't even call it a subsidiary or a division. It's just what we do. And for whatever reason, we decide to spin that off in its own entity. That will not be qualified as a minority business in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. So the question is, all of the ones I talked about require 51% direct ownership. So the question is, if we'll just say woman-owned small business.
Sure.
If your woman-owned small business company A has a subsidiary a wholly owned subsidiary, then that's a no, because that's not directly owned by a woman. Now, if company A is directly owned by a woman, and company A owns 49% of company B, and the woman also owns 51% of company B, then yes, there's a chance you can have both of those certified. Now, as John mentioned, there are other requirements that are tricky. One is full-time management. You really have to prove to SBA that you are full-time managing, and this is during normal industry business hours. And it's SBA will pop in and check. It's a very real thing. Full-time managing 2 companies. Now, I know there's crazy hardworking people out there that do it. I'm pretty sure John could do it. He's amazing. But it's hard to do. So.
Got it. Okay. And
I did want to make one clarification with the SBA's programs, and I'm so sorry for interrupting.
No.
HubZone is the one exception. There is no direct ownership requirement when it comes to getting HubZone status, and they don't worry about who manages stuff. That is solely going to be a question about, the makeup of your company, where it's located, things like that.
And you just need 51% ownership by U.S. citizens, right?
That's the one requirement when it comes to ownership and control.
Yep. And that's why I left that one out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Now, in pursuit of these contracts, at what point should we consider, or do we need to even consider hiring maybe a lobbying firm, or, for example, an outside law firm? At what point do we bring somebody like you on board?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And to be honest, there's not at least the way our firm runs, there's not a wrong time. And the reason is we've had lots of clients sign up with us, just kind of knowing they're going to need us, and then not reach out for a few months. We're not billing you unless we're doing work for you. So any time is fine. And the SBA, the application process for all of these is pretty extensive. SBA asks for a lot of documents, they ask a lot of questions. So really, a company that's getting started on that is smart to reach out to a consultant or a law firm and say, hey, can you help us with the narrative, with our operating agreement, with a few other things? That way you can simultaneously get everything ready and have a complete application in. There's not a wrong time at all. And we have clients reach out. I have clients right now that are just a name. They're not a company yet because they want to start a WSB company and they want to do it right. So there's really, really not a wrong time. I've also had clients that have been doing this for 100 years. So yeah.
So okay, so are you suggesting that we do not approach this with a shotgun type approach and go after every contract under the sun that says broadband, or do we just do like a rifle approach and be very selective and spend as much time on one contract on one RFP?
Can I take that, Nicole?
I would say that's a Nick question.
That's going to be a business question.
Yeah, so Harry, we could talk about this offline, and this might be a good time to talk about a survey that we're about to publish. We're going to be doing a press release next month. But here's a statistic that you might be interested to know, Harry. We asked thousands of government buyers a question, and the question was, how often do you end up hiring a company in a bid process that you never heard of before the bid process? And almost 30% of the time they said happens all the time.
Wow.
So there's a whole lot more to this survey than that, but we tell people when they're trying to decide, like, you know, which bid should they go after. Well, it's certainly better to have a rifle approach if you know the principles and you know the people involved, and that's always a good thing to do. But if you have a product that the government buys every week and every month, and you have good references and you can deliver the goods, submit an offer, because you never know what's going to happen. So we can talk more about that offline. Look for the press release next month.
Awesome. Thank you so much again.
Yeah. And any other questions, Harry? Because we want to bring Taylor on, and Michelle, we're going to bring you on as well. Any other questions for us, Harry?
I'll pass for now. I took too much of your time as it is. Thank you so much again for the opportunity.
Thanks for
Hey,
joining.
you're great.
Thank
You're
you.
great, Harry. Thank you.
Yep. So we're going to bring Taylor and Taylor on. We have two different Taylors, and I think I may know why. Let me just see if I can promote you to panelists.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Taylor?
Yes. Hey, Evan as well would be great to have up here with me. Oh, there he is. Oh, interesting. It says my name on Evan.
Okay. And that is not unprecedented. So we
What
have
the heck?
Taylor and Evan. Welcome to MyGovWatch Live. Where do you join us from and what do you do?
Well, thanks for having us. I appreciate it, Nick, John, and Nicole. I'm currently in South Carolina. Evan, why don't you?
Yeah, I'm up in Connecticut, Northwest Connecticut.
Yeah. And we build municipal websites as well as aggregate community and culture data, such as events, places, stories, and jobs. And we tend to work with economic developers and chambers of commerce. And Evan, would you like to add anything on top of that?
Yeah, no, that's a good thing. We have two main products. One is the community side, so that's when we're working like social, cultural, economic data, and powering their initiatives like tourism initiatives, economic development initiatives. And then our other product is specifically software for municipal websites and
Content management.
Yeah, exactly. So municipal staff can have an easy time uploading content that they need to upload to their public site. And a lot of times we dovetail in both products together into one site that handles the government business side of things, but also the community engagement, small business, celebrate our community side of things.
Well, it's a very interesting business. And I understand you all may have had some questions around proposal development or seeking out opportunities. Like, talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'll take it from here. So coming into this, I really had no idea what to expect, given that I'm fairly new when it comes to RFPs, building out proposals in response to those. So it's been super interesting to listen to both John and Nicole speak about the advantages that one can gain through the 8A classification and other classifications that I've seen as a part of that proposal building process, but I haven't really delved into. Coming into this, I had some questions about some best practices that you all have seen in your experience of responding to proposals and what your thoughts were on that front. But listening to the conversation up to now, the thought has occurred to me, and I'm going to attempt to formulate this the best I can. It sounds like if we don't have an 8A classification or a woman-owned business classification, or that we would be disadvantaged to those that do have the classifications. And correct me if I'm wrong here. I'm still learning all this, but
yeah, Taylor, let me answer from a state and local perspective.
Yeah.
And maybe Nicole and John can answer from a federal perspective.
Okay.
At the state and local level, it really doesn't apply, except in very limited municipal, county, and state solicitations. There are certain states that have requirements or that have certification programs that mimic the federal programs. And then within certain states, there are certain counties or certain cities that might have analogous programs. But
Okay.
by and large, you should be able to compete effectively for most opportunities in your industry. And that
Okay.
would be the state and local answer, and I'll defer.
Yeah, I think honestly it applies across the board. So in the federal contracting world, there is you're not wrong. In fact, you're what the court in Ultima agreed. They agreed with a white woman saying, hey, all these, you know, she got some WSB set asides, but she really wanted, I think essentially what happened, John might know more than me, but I think what happened was work that she used to do got moved into the 8A program. Once work moves into the 8A program, there's a rule called once 8A, always 8A. So really the government can't remove that work unless they have very clear reasoning. Now, what is very clear reasoning? Why would they remove it? Is let's say it's, let's say it's what you do. And let's say that it's in the 8A realm right now. Well, what sometimes happens more frequently than you would think is these 8A companies, so they have financial requirements they have to meet as an individual. They cannot make too much money as an individual. It also looks at the equity in their firm and things like that. They have to be a small business under their primary NAICS code. That rule doesn't apply to any small business out there. Small businesses don't have to pick a primary NAICS code and be small under it. Nobody cares. They need to be small under whatever NAICS code the contract is. 8A has to be small under its primary NAICS code and under the contract's NAICS code. So there's some rules like that at some point the government realizes, okay, we are out of the realm where 8As can efficiently and reasonably compete for this work. They're having to charge way higher prices because they're smaller. They have to be smaller or they get kicked out. They early graduate the 8A program. So there is a lot of work that comes out. So the government, just big picture, has kind of a list of priorities and it says, you know, small businesses first. Amongst the small businesses, we kind of want to do 8A and then we want to do like SDVOSB or EDWSB, I think, sort of, or then hub zone. They're all kind of in that area. And then like WSB would be one or VOSB would be one. So basically there's different rules for different agencies and some of them are court rules and some of them are regulations. So it gets tricky, but those are priorities. And then there's also lots of government contracts for large businesses. I'm not sure what size your company is, but there are just certain things small businesses can't provide. For example, airline travel. There's lots of federal government contracts that require some form of airline travel, and they can't tell a small business, hey, you can't subcontract to Southwest. You have to figure out a small business that can fly all these veterans or whatever it is. That's hard to do. So exactly as Nick said, there is still a realm, a very, very wide realm of things that are not set aside. I
would take it one step further, and I wonder if you agree with this, Nicole and John.
Yeah.
For a company like yours, Evan and Taylor, the state and local opportunities, you should be able to compete for 99% of them. I'm not sure that would ultimately be the case at the federal level, only because there's probably a concentration of firms that are already providing web development and CMS services for different federal agencies. It feels like that would be a tougher nut to crack. And that might also be why you've been able to build a business around municipal websites so far.
Yep.
I wonder if anyone agrees or could comment on that.
That does sound right. And yeah, and if you are in a situation too where you are a small business, there are you're a small business there are set asides that are purely for small businesses, and those you would be eligible for. And and under those solicitations, it's good to know that they really are. Once you're eligible for it, that's just, then it just comes down to your general bidding, your general considerations in terms of, technical ability, past performance, all of that and sort of thing, so that as there may well be, some of your competitors might be an 8A company because they are a small business. But at that point, it's just, it's just kind of up to that instead. There is one thing too, since I kind of the hub zone guy, there is one little weird advantage that hub zone companies get with a price preference, where they get their price, whatever they offer at, is considered actually a little lower to give them advantage, and that kind of applies for unrestricted contracts. So it's something important to be aware of, that does actually give them a direct advantage in that.
Mm-hmm.
But But I will say, I do think no, and it absolutely is understood that when it comes to the advantages that the main advantages are that there's just certain set asides that just go to 8A WSB that they've just set aside that those are the only ones can bid. But other contracts than that, it's generally small business set asides if you're eligible for that, and then unrestricted. It's just kind of a free game, if they can, if you can beat them at when it comes to your pricing and your past performance things that you should be able to be
Yep.
to do it. So
I want to add just one thing going back. We'll take it full circle here. If you can't beat them, join them. If your company is a little bit of, are you guys considered small, would you say?
Have you done that research? Do you know what the question means?
No.
Okay.
it's not. Well,
That's fair.
There's 3 people here.
Okay, so if you are doing services contracts, the government is going to determine whether or not you are small based on your annual receipts. So what you all need to do is hop on. I can even give you a link, or John maybe can.
And this is for federal only, by the way.
This is federal only. You want to hop on this NAICS code classification. We'll put it in the chat. And you want to look up what best describes the work that you do. And I know that sounds like it should be easy, but there are like sectors like 5.4, and then there's like, I forget what they even call them, but it's very hard to pick. And I have clients like, how do I pick? So you look at yours, and that's going to give you a general idea. Look at kind of a few. Because again, you're not 8A. You don't have to pick one and stay under it. You're looking at what contracts you'd probably want to bid on. So if you are considered small under those contracts, it's going to give you a number, because what you provide is services, right? Not supplies.
Correct.
Just making sure. So services, it's going to give you that number, and it's an annual receipts thing. And it's now a 5-year look back. So they will look at your last 5 years. Don't worry if you don't have 5 years, they just look at less. But they look at it and they average your annual receipts. And as long as your annual receipts are under that amount, you're small and you can bid on that work as a small business. Now, the other benefit, something comes out like that, you're like, yes, we're small, we want to bid, let's go. And then all of a sudden you see that 8A stamp on there. That does not mean it's over. That means you guys need to get in touch with some networking and find yourself an 8A firm that's looking for a partner. There are so many 8A firms that are so small and need help. They don't know, we haven't been doing this long, we don't know what we're doing, we really need some guidance. And having a company like yours that knows what it's doing, but just hasn't maybe done a ton of federal contracting, you can easily joint venture with them. You don't even need to get that approved. You find them, you sign a joint venture, and you go bid with them on that. And then you can do up to 60% of the work on that contract, as long as that 8A does 40% of the work. So you're not out of the game. It's just you have to find other ways to get in there. You can also subcontract. You can have an 8A subcontract to you, and they can give you up to 50% of the work. You can get your hands on any of those set asides simply by knowing companies that need some assistance in those statuses.
Well, thanks for enlightening me on that in particular. My last question really would come back to, and this is definitely more applicable to on a state and local level, really municipalities, but do you have any recommendations for building out proposals, just best practices that we should take into consideration when responding to RFPs? And that may be a Nick question, but.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's my understanding that you all are in the business of building or offering content management systems for municipalities and other government agencies that would like to manage their web content better, yes?
Yes.
So I would refer to this as a mature state and local market, meaning this is not a novel concept to the people you're marketing to, right? They've heard of it. And when that happens, what that means is there's a long history of solicitations and procurements and contracts that have been out there, where you can obtain through the open records process information on how different vendors were selected in different jurisdictions. Are you aware of the open records laws?
Yeah,
Okay.
open requests, is that
Open
what
requests, that would be one example. They have different names in different states. So what you could do as a strategy, and you can either do this through our website or do it yourself. There's some advantages to doing it through the website. You could have a strategy where you try to identify like maybe 10 to 20 contracts where you know that they were awarded in the last year. And you could then get the results of those procurements to include copy of the contract, evaluation showing who bid, names of the bidders, pricing of the bidders, winning proposals of the bidders, of your competitors, and compile all that and say, maybe I'm going to get 20 of these in the can, study them, and you will have your answer on what you need to say in your proposals.
So that's a service that MyGovWatch offers, because part of this call for the interest for me was also best utilization of your product.
Absolutely. And we can take that offline, but I will just very briefly say that sending people the leads is the crux of the service, but there's an add-on for doing the open records request, and it's incremental and it's optional. You're buying credits on the site and then telling us to go do that for you.
Oh, I see. Cool. Yeah, Taylor, you went through one of those processes at least.
Yeah, on my own. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's not easy. They need you to follow up. They need you to fill out the right form. Sometimes they don't like it if you're asking in the first place. And if somebody needs to fight with them, we fight with them. And it's always surprised me, Nicole and John, that we hardly ever need to get attorneys involved. I mean, typically, if we just get to the right person, they just do it. So additional follow-up questions, because I think Evan and Taylor, I would be very interested in speaking to you some more offline about this.
Agreed. That's mutual.
Yeah, so stay with us. Michelle, I think we're going to bring you on now again as a panelist, and you can join us. And Taylor and Evan, you can either stay with us if you think of anything as a follow-up. We're sort of past what we typically do in these sessions, but no one has a hard stop here. So if you want to just stay, like, in the panel with Michelle and us, we'll sort of just like let this die organically as people run out of questions.
And I just
Welcome
wanted to add
back, Michelle.
quickly. Oh, sorry.
Welcome back.
In reference to the conversation on a socially disadvantaged narrative, and the gentleman who was asking whether or not, since it's no longer race-based, whether there's more ways people can apply, and so I wanted to ask Nicole this question. So I wrote our narrative, and I wrote it with the help of an SBA business specialist and his supervisor, and I had to write it 2 or 3 different times, right, in order to get it right, because one of the things I wanted to clarify was the new way of writing the narrative required you to provide who, what, where, how, and when you were discriminated. It was very specific. It couldn't be subjective. You had to provide very specific examples. You couldn't say, I believe I was discriminated. You have to show specifically how you were discriminated. And, that means going back in time to find, the 2021 or the 1999, I was discriminated. And I was just wondering, Nicole, how you overcame that in writing those narratives, or what I'm trying to determine is, because I worked with a couple of people at the SBA, whether they were being more comprehensive than other agencies were, whether they had me go through more hoops than other regional offices would require.
Yeah, those are great questions. First of all, you're lucky that your BOS and any SBA representative helped you out. That's not something that's super common. It's something we always encourage our clients to ask. Literally, anytime there's an issue involving SBA, we say, hey, if you are 8A and you have a BOS, reach out to them and see if they can help. And some people say my BOS never answers. Some people say my BOS is amazing. So that's a subjective thing. You're lucky yours helped you. Did they put you through more hoops than required? Probably not, unfortunately. Now, I will tell you, when they added all these SBA reviewers, some of them had to be schooled, and were a bit schooled by yours truly, in what the rules still are. There still are rules. And for example, the rules say you have to show how you know the treatment you received was discrimination, or how you are determining that it was more likely than not based on discrimination and not on something else. And that can be as simple as saying, I got paid $20 an hour. This guy got paid $30 an hour. We had the same experience, the same education, etc. So I think it was based on race. Nobody has, I mean, I had a few, but most people do not have the smoking gun. They do not have someone saying, hey, I don't like that you're African American, so you can't do this. I don't like that you're a woman. We've had some of those. Those are really easy to write. That was 10 minutes. But there's normally it's far more subtle. Most of the time when I write these, like for women, it's something where they're invited to, you know, come talk about teaming. And as soon as they walk in the door, it's the good old boys club right away. And they're just completely excluded and never talked to again. Things like that. Can I prove that that's because I'm a woman? No. But was I the only woman in the room? Was I the only one treated like that? Yes. So that's kind of what the rules are. The reason they were probably so tough on you is because it is so subjective. We have all these reviewers. Some of them are brand new. Some of them have been doing this forever and they're more stuck in the old ways. They're all going to be different. Like I said earlier, we had narratives that I would consider very similar, like same thing, like both arguing the same disability. And one immediately gets approved and one is going back and forth 5 and 6 times. So it's so subjective. They probably prepared you for the worst, and that's a good thing.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Have you had your narrative approved yet?
Oh yeah, we got our certification, and going back to whether or not there was a backlog, we thought once we got the narrative approved, which was the very last step, that we would get caught in this backlog. But then we got the certification probably within 30 days after we submitted the narrative. So
good. Sounds like that confirms other stuff. We've taken a lot of things full circle today. Well,
yeah,
I do just want to say, oh, go ahead.
Let me just say one other thing too.
Yeah.
I received. Yes, we ended up getting a business specialist to work with us, but it was only after I finally cornered a director of the Washington agency at a meeting and told him that I was frustrated because nobody from SBA was returning my phone call. So yes, I finally got someone, but it wasn't without a lot of effort.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That sounds pretty right on. And that is one reason we draft these narratives and we review these narratives. I think current estimate we give is about 3 to 10 hours. And, you know, really spending some money up front to have that done right is not a bad idea. Whether it's us, another firm that does this, a consulting firm even, I caution if you're using a consulting firm to make sure that they don't make any legal claims. I have had to kind of get on the phone with consulting firms and say, hey, here's what the rule really says, but they can be helpful. And a lot of times they'll do like a flat rate, which attorneys won't do. So yes, it can be really helpful to get help. Most people aren't as lucky as you were to get the SBA's help. And the only other thing I wanted to note is, you know, we can't understand, but we very much sympathize with you and every other person out there that had to go dig through their past and talk about things like racism and sexism. And I mean, I've had women had to go bring up sexual assault. There's been all kinds of things. And I have not been happy talking to many of my clients as they cry about things that they've had to refresh and in great detail and put in the narrative. The only other thing I'll say, because I know you mentioned you need all the details, there's some exceptions. I've had a couple clients ask, can I not put this name in there for this? It's an important reason. I don't want their name out there for this reason. It could be even that there could be a criminal suit or something. And we've had to push back a little to SBA, but we've done so and they've still been able to get in. So there are some exceptions. They have to just have kind of a good basis.
One other quick comment. I heard or read somewhere that there are those in Congress who want to demand that those socially disadvantaged narratives be made public. Have you heard anything about that?
I have not heard anything specifically of any representative, you know, mentioning that. And there'd be a lot of issues with. First of all, one thing consideration we have gotten a lot of questions about if because of FOIA, and maybe that is you're referring to.
It was an Ultima request. She requested, the lady in that Ultima case requested that these be either made completely public or subject to FOIA or something. Sorry to cut you off. Continue, John.
Yeah. One thing important, at least when it comes to FOIA, is that there is an exception to FOIA requests for, it's just kind of a catch-all, but it's very applicable here for certain just kind of personal matters, things that are, you know, very private nature and things like that, that it's not that, that they would say it's not in the public's interest really and we think that would be very surprised any court would, even move away and still grant it, regardless of FOIA and stuff, just because of it doesn't really produce any advantage to anyone to see what those narratives look like. If there was going to be any review by a judge, for example, what we think that they would do is you do what's called an in-camera review, where the judge is allowed to view it, and that may be a possibility, but that stuff is still considered private and it's not shared with the public. And so there are ways that, if it did come to some sort of even review stage, that there would be many alternatives. If it got to the point, I'm not surprised if there are a few representatives pushing out there, but I would be very surprised if it gets to the point where they publicize these narratives.
Yeah. I think if that happened, you're going to see a big fight.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. And by the way, I have had clients in the past request documentation on HubZone applications, which is a related, but not entirely unrelated issue. But just intuitively, like if somebody pours out their life story in one of these narratives, and the SBA says, "Yeah, we believe this person. This person should be given this status." Who needs to see that? And in the most extreme example, maybe a judge, but no one else. And that I see that as entirely different than whether or not somebody's really operating in a hub zone.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. For example, yeah, with a hub zone sort of thing, that sort of information, that would make more sense because, you're talking addresses and like the company's address, for example, it's pretty much public knowledge anyways. So there's no real concern there. Whereas, yeah, with 8A stuff like that you're talking people's life histories, medical histories, even,
sexual assault is very common. Yeah.
Criminal histories. Yep. I mean, a lot of things. And that are going to be, that courts are loath to let that information out, outside of the most, and even then, like I said, there's many ways where they could do it, where even if, a judge has to take a look at it, or some official has to take a look at it, that it is still completely forbidden for them to publicize that.
Yep.
So
just to go law school on you real fast. So the big case on privacy in the United States was called CATS, and it's definitely been extended in different ways for public security, but really public security has been one of the only reasons that people have kind of stomped on that. And it basically stands for the presumption that if you provide information under the assumption that it is private, it should not be disclosed publicly. So that's a general rule of law, and they're going to have to fight pretty darn hard to show that this is some big public security matter or in some other way is absolutely crucial to the nation. So I again, don't see it happening.
Great, very helpful, guys.
Yep.
Michelle, and thank you for joining us. I would just add that it's just really interesting to me. I would just word this very carefully. I will just say that having been aware of significant fraud in these programs, it doesn't surprise me that someone wants some of this stuff to be made public because of known fraud around these programs. But to me, it's clear there's a clear line there.
Yeah.
Well, fantastic. We had one other question from Frankie. Frankie had a question on how to get his logistics company to transport and relocate government property, and you'd like to talk offline about this. Frankie, I know you're listening. I will contact you after this session and we can go over that. I'll send you an email. I have your email address on sign up. So before we start to wrap this up, Nicole, I gave you and John the ability to share. Did you all want to share any takeaways as far as things that you would like people to do? I know there's the small GovCon newsletter. What would you like people to do in order to keep in contact with you and hear about the firm and what's happening?
Yeah, I've actually, let me pull this up. And one thing I wanted to say is, Frankie, you have a great name. That is my 2-year-old's name. We went classic with it, and he's Franklin. So just wanted to put that out there. Okay, I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to give you some of our contact information and ways you can follow us on social media and ways that you can follow our newsletter and our blog. And while I put that up there, kind of big takeaways. Let me make sure I'm doing this right. This is tricky. This would be screen 3, I think. Okay, tell me that are you seeing?
Yes.
questions and all of that good stuff. Okay.
Free monthly newsletter.
Yep. Perfect.
Yep.
So
Let's go to
that
mine.
is our free monthly e-newsletter, and it's wonderful. Subscribing to that keeps you up to date on everything. LinkedIn updates, those are fun because, you know, we often write blogs. While we keep them in plain language, they can get a bit boring. So sometimes when they're posted on LinkedIn, they have fun catch lines and little takeaways that are, I don't know, kind of laughable. You can call us, and our firm is different than many in that you will get a real live human being on the other end. We have Rhonda or Joan or Kaylin, and they're amazing. They will make sure you get in contact with us. So don't be afraid to call. I know in this modern age, I don't like calling most of the time because I feel like I then have to ask for a representative 100 times. But that doesn't happen here. And you don't go online to schedule, you schedule with a human, and it's nice and easy. So there's John and I's actual emails for work. So feel free to email both of us, one of us, if you have any questions. We'll instantly answer. If it's a tough one, we'll tell you it might take a while to get back to you. But yeah, big takeaways are, I think kind of everything today we talked about was somewhat centered around, you know, what's out there for what types of companies and who has advantages and who has disadvantages. And I think that for me, one of the big takeaways is just find the way that you can take what you may consider your disadvantage and use it to your advantage. So again, if you are a big company or a small business and you're really wanting to get involved in some of these, you can try applying. It's not, no one's going to, you know, be mad at you. You can apply without an attorney even. Better shot with one, but and if it doesn't work, then you can team up, you can do subcontracts. So I kind of like that full circle feeling of, you know, take whatever is not your advantage and see if you can make it an advantage. That's all I have. I'll turn it over to John.
Sorry, I didn't know it was me. Yeah, no, that's exactly it. Yeah, and I will say too is we generally do kind of focus on the kind of the smaller business side, but these what we note here, you know, these rules can generally apply with you know, many federal government contract situations. And it's one thing too important to note is that even if, you know, it's an unrestricted a contract where there's no restrictions on, you know, who can apply, you know, so I mean it could be big, so it could be, you know, giant companies, it could be small companies, you know. That one thing to remember too, that doesn't mean that, you know, well, that means a large company is going to absolutely get it. You know, each contract's really different, and we can assist with any of those situations. And even if it's not us, you know, especially if there's anything where you have, it's a question of the law, you know, there's going to be, you know, if you come to me and you ask, you know, hey, you know, which product should I use in this or that? I'm like, well, that you're probably know better than me. But if it's a question of law or something, you know, where it's, hey, I don't know what this regulation means, or hey, I don't know, is there maybe a protest? Or is there a potential protest here that we can make, you know, when it comes to this sort of this solicitation? That's something that we can assist with. Or again, even if not us, it's something that you should definitely just discuss with a government contracts attorney, someone who specializes in that, because it's a very unique area of law that's different from, you know, your general other areas of law. And there's most attorneys aren't going to have much experience with that. So you'll want to get someone who definitely kind of focuses in that area, and that's something we can provide.
Yeah, and if your questions at all start getting into the realm of how do I win these and which products and how do I do my proposal, and you've got Nick, and we will send you to him if that comes up. Nick is an amazing resource too. So definitely,
Well,
yeah.
Thank you for that, Nicole. And just one parting thought. It just and I should have brought this up earlier. You mentioned a legal standard, I think, as it related to these narratives for 8A. And you said something about, is it more likely than not that it happened, right? And isn't that kind of analogous to the preponderance of the evidence standard?
Yeah. And that's actually in the rule. And it's not that it happened. That part, it has to have happened. You have to have details and say it happened. The question was, because I think Michelle mentioned that, you know, they were asking all these questions, you needed all these details, and you had to 100% prove that it was discrimination. So that was the part I dialed back on. I said, actually, and I've had to literally tell this to reviewers who didn't know, you do not have to prove it. The rule that's still a rule, order did nothing to that part of the rule, says you have to show if there's an alternative reason. So if there could be another reason, you just have to show that it is more likely than not that it was based on your race or your gender or your sexual orientation, whatever it was. So that is often a, hey, that's just how I felt because I was the only woman in the room, or it's how I felt because it seemed like everybody was whispering about something and I was never involved in it. And next thing you know, I'm the only person not getting contracts. Like there's a lot of ways you can get there without having to say, hey, yeah, the person turned to me and said, I don't like women.
Yeah, that's hardly ever going to happen.
Never. I mean, I have had a couple. We've had a few.
They do exist.
You'd be surprised.
Well, maybe I wouldn't be so surprised.
No,
The reason why I bring it up, and I will really bring this full circle now. Like we were talking about your trip to Puerto Vallarta. I'm going to Costa Rica with my kids. And John, I don't know if you have kids, but in my house, my wife uses the preponderance of the evidence standard in everything that happens around the house. Like this one threw something at that one, this one took the candy, whatever it is, she uses the preponderance of the evidence standard. I use beyond a reasonable doubt. And I wonder if you've ever thought about it that way with your kids, or maybe they're too young.
So I have 2 kids, 3 foster fail dogs, and 2 cats. So I think I preponderance of the evidence quite a bit because there's a lot of potential culprits at my house.
Yes, there's not a lot of cross-examination.
No, candy bag gets ripped out and they're missing all the pieces. That could have been anyone. Yeah.
Well, folks, I really appreciate you participating. That'll do it for today's edition of MyGovWatch Live. Don't forget to connect with Nicole and John on LinkedIn through the firm and sign up for the newsletter that you can see on the screen. Remember, if you're not already a subscriber, start your 14-day free trial today of mygovwatch.com. If you want to win more government contracts for less, you'll be glad you did. And thanks, folks.
Thanks for having us, Nick. This was a really great one. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.